High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. He was very much admired indeed. And one night there flew over the city a little swallow. "Where shall I put up?" he said. "I hope the town has made preparations." And then he saw the statue on the tall column. And he prepared to go to sleep. And just as he was putting his head down under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. "A curious thing," he cried. "There's not a single cloud in the sky. The climate in the north is really dreadful." And then another drop fell. "What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off?" he said. "I must look for a good chimney pot," and he determined to fly away. But before he had opened his wings, a 3rd drop fell, and he looked up and saw, what did he see? The eyes of the Happy Prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. "Who are you?" he said. "I am the Happy Prince." "Why are you weeping then?" asked the swallow. "When I was alive and had a human heart," answered the statue, "I lived in the palace, and my courtiers called me the Happy Prince, and happy indeed I was, if pleasure be happiness. So I lived and so I died, and now that I am dead they have set me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep." "What, is he not solid gold?" said the swallow to himself. He was far too polite to make any personal remarks out loud. "Far away," continued the statue, "far away in a little street there is a poorhouse. One of the windows is open. Through it I can see a woman seated at a table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse red hands, all pricked by the needle, for she is the seamstress. She is embroidering passion flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the Queen's maids of honor to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking for oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water, and so he is crying. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal, and I cannot move." "I am waited for in Egypt," said the swallow. "My friends are flying up and down the Nile and talking to the large lotus flowers." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me for one night and be my messenger? The boy is so thirsty, and the mother so sad." "It's very cold here," he said, "but I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger." And so the little swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. And he passed by the cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. And he passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. And a beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. "How wonderful the stars are," he said to her. "And how wonderful is the power of love." "I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball," she answered. "I have ordered passion flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy." He passed over the river and saw the lanterns hanging to the masts of ships. And at last he came to the poorhouse and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep. She was so tired. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Then the swallow flew back to the Happy Prince and told him what he had done. "It is curious," he remarked, "but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold." "That is because you have done a good action," said the prince. And the little swallow began to think, and then he fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. And when day broke, he flew down to the river and had a bath. "Tonight I go to Egypt," said the swallow, and he was in high spirits at the prospect. And when the moon rose, he flew back to the Happy Prince. "Have you any commissions for Egypt?" he cried. "I'm just starting." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not stay with me one night longer?" "I'm waited for in Egypt," answered the swallow. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "far away across the city I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers. But he is too cold to write any more. There is no fire in the grate, and hunger has made him faint." "I will wait for you one night longer," said the swallow. "Shall I take him another ruby?" "Alas, I have no ruby now," said the prince. "My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires, which were brought out of India 1,000 years ago. Pluck out one of them and take it to him. He will sell it to the jeweler and buy food and firewood and finish his play." "Dear prince," said the swallow, "I cannot do that." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." And so the swallow plucked out the prince's eye and flew away to the student's garret. It was easy enough to get in, as there was a hole in the roof. Through this he darted and came into the room. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings. And when he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire. "I am beginning to be appreciated," he cried. "Now I can finish my play." The next day the swallow flew down to the harbour, and he sat on the mast of a large vessel and watched the sailors hauling in big chests out of the hold with ropes. And when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "I'm come to bid you goodbye," he cried. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me one more night?" "It is winter," said the swallow, "and the chill snow will soon be here. Dear prince, I must leave you, but I will never forget you, and next spring I will bring you back 2 beautiful jewels in the place of those you have given away. The ruby shall be redder than the red rose, and the sapphire shall be as blue as the great sea." "In the square below," said the happy prince, "there stands a little match girl. She has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not bring home money, and she is crying. She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare. Pluck out my other eye and give it to her, and her father will not beat her." "I will stay with you one night longer," said the swallow, "but I cannot pluck out your eye. You will be quite blind." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." And so he plucked out the prince's other eye and darted down with it. He swooped past the match girl and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. And then the swallow came back to the prince. "You are blind now," he said, "so I will stay with you always." "No, little swallow," said the poor prince. "You must go away to Egypt." "I will stay with you always," said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands. He told him of the red ibises who stand in long rows on the banks of the Nile and catch goldfish in their beaks. Of the Sphinx, who is as old as the world itself and lives in the desert and knows everything. Of the great green snake that sleeps in a palm tree and has 20 priests to feed it with honey cakes. And of the pygmies who sail over a big lake on large flat leaves and are always at war with the butterflies. "Dear swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvelous things. But more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, dear swallow, and tell me what you see there." Let's try that again. "Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvelous things. But more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and of women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there." And so the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at the gates. And he flew down dark alleys and saw the faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. And then he flew back and told the prince what he had seen. "I am covered with fine gold," said the prince. "You must take it off leaf by leaf and give it to the poor." Leaf after leaf of fine gold the swallow picked off, till the happy prince looked quite dull and grey. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold he brought to the poor, and the children's faces grew rosier, and they laughed and played games in the streets. And then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver, they were so bright and glistening, and long icicles like crystal daggers hung down from the eaves of houses, and everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet caps and skated on the ice. And the poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. He picked up crumbs from outside the baker's door when the baker was not looking, and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. But at last he knew he was going to die. He had just strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. "Goodbye, dear prince," he murmured. "Will you let me kiss your hand?" "I'm glad you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow," said the prince. "You have stayed too long." "It is not to Egypt that I am going," said the swallow. "I am going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not?" And he kissed the happy prince on the lips and fell down dead at his feet. And at that moment, a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. And the fact is, the leaden heart had snapped right in two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. Early the next morning, the mayor was walking in the square below in the company of the town councillors, and as they passed by the column, he looked up at the statue. "Dear me, how shabby the happy prince looks," he said. "And here is actually a dead bird at his feet," continued the mayor. "We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here." And so they pulled down the statue of the happy prince, and then they melted the statue in a furnace. "We must have another statue, of course," said the mayor, "and it shall be a statue of myself, said each of the town councillors, and they quarrelled, and when last I heard, they were quarrelling still. "What a strange thing," said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry. "This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace. We must throw it away." And so they threw it on a dust heap, where the body of the little swallow was also lying. "Bring me the two most precious things in all the city," said God to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the leaden heart and the dead bird. "You have chosen wisely," said God, "for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forevermore, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me."